Okay.
And Dad was sick for many, many years.
10 years.
10
He
years.
was in a wheelchair.
Yeah. So,
After he died,
after Leonard died, we were friendly with neighbors on both sides of us, and the Silvermans lived next door to us, and they asked me if I would go out with a cousin of theirs. So I said yes, I would be okay. And they introduced me to Jack Goldman, who was a designer of ornamentation for very fine dresses. He did the beading. He did the beading designs. In fact, he was so good at it that the Metropolitan Museum had an exhibition of a lot of his work. So I met Jack, and we had a very pleasant relationship. I went with him for, I think it was 2 years, and unfortunately he developed a severe, he hurt his foot on something in the gym, and he got some kind of a blood condition, and it just accelerated and ended up where he had no more red blood corpuscles. He got it completely anemic, and he died. Actually, he died when I was in Europe with you.
but you had already sort of broken up with him because you had met Sam.
Yes. How did I meet Sam? I met Sam through a friend of mine.
It was a blind date, and he was intrigued because he had lived on Johnson Place,
Yes.
but he didn't really know who you were.
Yes. Right. So he called me and said, "We're neighbors, I'd like to meet you." And he was very charming, and I liked him a lot. So he belonged to the Woodmere Club, and we really had a very good time together.
You were going to marry him.
I was going to marry him. I really felt we were going to move to the city and get married. Unfortunately, he had a heart attack, and he died.
And since then, you've never once considered remarrying. Do you feel that you considered remarrying because it felt like the right thing to do, and you've now changed your view on that, or?
I changed my view on it. I felt that I didn't want to get married anymore. But just being friendly with someone was a very pleasant thing, to have a relationship with someone.
So after Sam died,
After Sam died,
Sydney.
I met Sydney. I was friendly with the Orzaks in Woodmere, and they had a brother-in-law who lived in Sarasota who had just lost his wife, and they introduced me to Sydney, and we started going out, and Sydney was very anxious for me to move to Sarasota, and I had thought of moving to Sarasota because I liked it, and that's when I started renting in Sarasota.
No, you were already renting, and you decided to move here year-round.
Permanently, instead of renting.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I did.
So Sydney was your guy for about 7
7
years.
years, yeah.
And then guess what?
He died.
He died.
Actually, my grandson, Eric, said to me, "Grandma, you shouldn't have any more boyfriends. They all died."
How many since then?
No,
Several.
Yes, you didn't listen to Eric.
no, I didn't listen to him.
Okay, so after Sydney,
Then I met Erwin.
right, it was a friend of Frida's.
It was a friend of Frida's, and she said there was someone living at her facility who was very nice, and she thought that it would be very nice for me to meet him. At the time, I said to her, well, why don't you introduce him to Frida? Frida is your friend. Why do you want to introduce him to me? She said, Frida's too big for him. He's not tall enough for her. So I met Erwin, who was a delightful, wonderful
He
person.
was a doll.
Yeah. He was interested in everything. He was very bright, and he was wonderful company.
The former, what did he do before he retired?
He was with,
Hewlett Packard. Hewlett Packard.
was it Hewlett Packard? For how many years?
His whole career.
His whole career. He was with Hewlett Packard.
He was an engineer.
Yes. He was an engineer. He was also a professor.
Okay.
He taught at a college, too.
And interesting aside is that, I'm sorry to be talking so much,
Yeah.
is that Grandma managed to become close to
His niece.
his niece, Sydney's daughter,
Yeah.
Sam's son.
children, yeah.
They were not Jack's. They were not.
No.
But most of the time, my mom has developed her own personal relationship
Yeah.
with a
And-
relative of each
And
of
then, when I moved here, I was fortunate enough to meet Mike, who I really adored. And we had an absolutely perfect relationship for 2 wonderful years. And I miss him terribly, but I was very fortunate because he was really a very unusual person. And that's the story of my life.
That's my good friend. Can you talk about your siblings? I think we didn't really cover that in the last one. We didn't talk about Sylvia and Norman.
No?
We didn't?
Not a lot.
No. Well, my
Yes, it took.
sister,
You were the baby.
I was the baby of the family. My sister Sylvia was 5 years older than me. Completely the opposite of me. We had absolutely nothing in common. She went her way. She didn't want to be bothered by her kid sister. And I did not have a good relationship with her. My brother, it was a very close, and we loved each other and we hated each other. We really,
You fought.
yeah, we used to disagree on practically everything, but we really loved each other. And it was very sad to see how he ended his life. He had really some very terrible times. He lost his first wife, who was a wonderful person, and she died and gave birth to a dead child. And then he married Dorothy, and it was not a very happy marriage. And then he met Ina, where he
That
did
was
have
the
a
love
very,
of his life.
he really did have a wonderful marriage with her. And
Were you surprised when he decided to enlist in the military? Because he enlisted, he wasn't drafted.
yeah,
Or am I wrong?
Right, he enlisted.
yeah, he enlisted.
And so, and this is World
Well, he
War.
felt he was going to be drafted anyway, and that it would be better for him
This is World War II.
to enlist, and
What-
he did.
What
Had his wife just died? Was that?
Yes, his wife had just died, and he was in terrible mental shape.
So
And
join
he
the
felt-
army.
He felt it would be good for him to just get away from everything, and be.
When was this roughly? Do you remember what year?
1942, 43. I mean, he was in the Battle of the Bulge.
He was in the battle. He won a bronze medal of honor. He was very courageous.
Did he talk about when he came back? Did he talk about his experiences
For a while
there?
he couldn't, and then he did. He did talk about it. He mentioned often that a very good friend of his at the Battle of the Bulge was killed right walking next to him. Yeah. And he had a strange philosophy of life, though, my brother.
How would you describe his philosophy?
Never even think about anything bad happening. Just
Live for the moment.
just live for the moment, which is what he did his whole life, which was not a very practical way of living.
So he lived till he was 99.
Right.
Sylvia
Lived to 95.
And Grandma Eva lived
Was
to 94. Talk about Sylvia and her brain tumor. I mean, it's incredible that she lived into her 90s.
Yeah. Well, she was always sickly. She used to get migraine headaches.
Well, a brain tumor can do that.
Yeah. And we didn't know that it was a brain
Right.
tumor.
And she had that surgery in 1948.
Yeah. She had, I will never forget this about the brain surgery. She said that when she was coming, after the operation, she felt herself up on the ceiling, and she was dead, but she was living, and she saw herself in bed, and she was up on the ceiling.
Ooh.
And it was a very strange thing. Oh, another thing I should mention, when Leonard died, that day, he had been very sick, and he was in bed, and we had Lou, as she lived with us. She took charge of him. And this day, she was going to the city, and so I was left with him, and I was taking a piano lesson that day, and I said to him before I left, maybe I shouldn't go. He said, no, he said, I'm going to lay here anyway, it doesn't make any difference, you'll be back in an hour. And I went. I am a very irreligious person, but that day, I came back after my lesson, and I yelled up to him, Bunny, you okay? And there was no answer. And I got this very strange feeling. I get the shivers now when I even talk about it. I knew that he was gone. I just knew that he was gone. But a sense of relief came over me. I knew that it was the most wonderful thing for him, and it was the wonderful for me. Really? No, what's so funny? It wasn't funny. No. What are you talking about? It was terrible, but it was a big relief. But I really felt the presence of some other being, of something, that
I remember you said you felt his soul leaving.
I just,
Yeah.
it was a very weird thing. That was my only ever feeling of religion.
Well,
I don't know
you're
what
also
that
you've
was.
always been sort of psychic. You've often been
Yeah.
intuitive about things that were going to happen.
Yeah. That is the story of my life.
You keep saying that.
And then there's more. What are some other things?
That's enough.
That's enough.
Okay, we can end.
That is enough.
Anything? I'm trying to think if there's anything specific. Oh, okay. Well, we have to get to
It's
lunch.
12 o'clock.
Yeah,
We have to get to lunch.
We have to get going.
All right.